Hello, hello, and welcome again to a Beatles talk show that we call Things We Said Today. This is a bi-weekly show where we talk about anything that we feel like where the Beatles are concerned. The past, the present, the solo careers, their years together. We have authors on the show. We have film directors on the show. We have all kinds of special guests that we welcome to the program, and certainly we will have one in just a few moments from now. I'm Ken Michaels. I'm one of the three regular co-hosts of the show, known for my syndicated radio program on the Beatles called Every Little Thing. I also co-host another Beatles talk show podcast called Talk More Talk, a solo Beatles video cast, and I have my own YouTube channel as well called Ken Michaels Radio, being joined by Darren DeVivo, who is a mainstay in the New York radio area on WFUV. He's been there about as long as I've been doing Beatles shows, roughly, what is it, 42 years or
Oh,
43?
not quite. Almost 42, 41 and change. I thought you were
Okay.
going to say as long as radio's been invented.
We both are that way. Anyway, so good to have you here, Darren.
Thank
And
you. Thank you. Hi, everyone.
of course, we have Allan Kozinn, who is the co-writer with Adrian Sinclair of the wonderful McCartney Legacy books, volumes one and two. Also, the author of Got That Something, How the Beatles I Want to Hold Your Hand Changed Everything. I really think it's the inner light that changed everything, but Alan feels differently about that. But at some point, we'll talk about that.
It was
And
Revolution.
also, what's that?
It was Revolution 9 that changed everything, really.
Okay. You should do a book on that.
I should.
You know, one of our shows, you gave this explanation why it's the most fascinating Beatles recording to you,
Hmm.
and it still is, huh?
Well, I don't know. That might be too much to say. Probably Strawberry Fields is the most fascinating recording to me, but still.
All right. Still a very interesting part of their legacy, Revolution number nine. So on today's show, like I said, we will have a special guest um, who's going to talk about her documentary. Little clue for you all. And we'll talk about that in just a few moments. But first, as usual, we have the latest in Beatle news. Now, I want to caution everybody that in our last show, we had Alan G. Parker as our guest, the director of Borrowed Time. We forewent Beatle news in that show because there was so much to get to. So I packed it all in the last Talk More Talk podcast. There's over an hour's worth of news, and it covers the last month, probably a little bit more than a month of news. And there's a lot of stuff there that you probably know, probably some stuff there that you weren't aware of. But I would definitely suggest to go check that out. The last show that we did on Talk More Talk. And I think it says all the news. You can find it on our YouTube channel and also on all audio platforms. So what you're going to hear is the news since then, and I'll repeat just a few news items that are pretty important here for our show. First of all, Let It Roll, songs by George Harrison, is coming out on vinyl on July the 11th. It'll be a double album set. First released in 2009, 19 tracks in total, spanning George's entire solo career, including three Beatles songs performed live from the concert for Bangladesh. This is apparently the first time it's ever been released on vinyl. So that's coming out on July the 11th. Also, Dark Horse Records just released the song Faithfully. This is the classic song from Journey, and a new version by former lead singer Steve Perry, teaming up with Willie Nelson. This was done to celebrate the 40th anniversary of Farm Aid, and proceeds from the single will benefit the nonprofit organization. A new video was made for the song as well. Okay. Paul McCartney was at the Palace Theater in New York City on May the 22nd to watch Glenn Ross. He gets around, sees shows at the theater, goes to sporting events. Also, Alan G. Parker, who I just mentioned, went on Facebook to announce that his John Lennon documentary, Borrowed Time, Lennon's Last Decade, has now been picked up for the USA by Maverick Entertainment. I wrote to him asking, does that mean in movie theaters or DVD Blu-ray? He said, this is all I know so far. We just know August is the important date for Borrowed Time. Okay. Also, BBC News is reporting that a hotel where John and Yoko stayed as newlyweds is in danger of being demolished. The couple at the Georgian Grade 2 is listed as Corbett Arms in the seaside town of Tywin, Gwynedd. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. In the summer of 1969, they stayed there. The hotel has been shut for a decade, and after attempts to find the owner, the local council has applied for the 19th century hotel to be knocked down as parts have already collapsed. The Beatles were on a break during the recording of their Abbey Road album, where the Lennons visited there in North Wales. Okay, big news item, as we reported in Talk More Talk, was the new duet between Barbra Streisand and Paul McCartney of My Valentine, which dropped on May the 16th. It's from Barbara's new album called The Secret of Life Partners Volume 2. And of course, Paul first released his song on Kisses on the Bottom, which came out in 2012. And first time ever, Barbra Streisand teaming up with Paul McCartney on record. I know that we talked to Darren on Talk More Talk about this, and you can repeat what you said about it. But I'd like to know Allan's impression of the new My Valentine.
I like the old one.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, um, he's not in very good voice, and I guess that bothers me. I mean, here's the thing about Paul, he knows apparently that he's not in great voice these days, um, but wants to continue doing what he does, and I can't blame him. And I also can't blame anybody who wants to go see him with his voice in that state to see him. As a fan, I might go if he did a concert, reasonably close to me. Um, as someone who spent his life as a music critic, though, I sort of have to be honest about the performance. And Barbra Streisand is an incredible voice on this record. I mean, she is quite powerful.
Hmm.
And Paul is sort of like whispering.
Yeah.
And, I've tried to persuade myself that that was the interpretive idea they were going for. Um, I don't, I don't know. I'd rather not even say anymore, to tell you the truth.
That was basically my opinion of it. I liked it, but I didn't mind Paul's voice. I thought he sounded a little better than I thought he would.
Hmm.
And figured that, I want to see him continue to record music for as long as he can. I I am not terribly interested in seeing him perform live anymore. I mean, I hate saying that. Of course, I want to see him perform live, but um, just state his voice is in it just is not can't handle live performance anymore. But I think that in the right controlled environment in the studio, changing naturally the way he delivers a song. He sounds old, but he could still make a recording. And I felt that if he was singing alone, it would be okay. Singing in this, maybe that's the way it works. Paul's going to have to sing in more of a hushed, whispery type of tone and not tax his voice. And still, if he's writing strong material, which you would think he would, okay, that's what we get. I mean, I think it's Ian Anderson has pretty much reinvented his style into almost like a spoken word kind of with Jethro Tull. Um, but it's the a little bit of the imbalance of Barbara singing normally and Paul singing his 2025 normal, and that is a little awkward. Um, and it kind of throws the balance off a bit. And I also don't never liked, it doesn't matter who the singers are. I never liked, I mentioned this on Talk More Talk. To me, duets signal the end of a career. or the lack of additional ideas. How many veteran artists have put out duets albums at the end? It's rehashing old material. It's bringing together people that on paper sounds great, but when executed, do I really need a modern day strong singer like Hozier or Leve singing with Barbra Streisand? I don't know. Bob Dylan with Streisand, I really want to hear. I haven't heard that one yet. The album's, of course, not out yet. But I'm not a big fan of the whole duets concept and that whole repeating lines thing, which other duets have happened. I love your face. Yeah, I love your face. You don't have to repeat. I don't like the repeating. Do you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And he loves his face. Darren loves his face. I said that already. Why are we repeating the line again for the sake of having the second vocalist chime in before the fade out? Um, so there's a little bit of that going on in the song too that I thought, yeah, Paul, voice is weak. Don't need to respond to the last line of Barbara's. But it sounds like I hate it. I didn't hate it. I thought it was better than I thought, and I enjoyed it and prefer the original though.
Okay. And I'll repeat what I said on Talk More Talk, which is that I like both versions. It's really tough for me to decide which one I like more. Probably the first one. But I don't agree with the idea that a duets album is what you do at the end of your career. I think that it's a great opportunity for certain singers to work with people that they never have before. Maybe if it's towards the end of their career, they're trying to get in as many people as they want to, people they've never, shared a microphone with and done a duets with. There are times when in recent years, like I loved Paul with Tony Bennett. I thought they sounded great together. But the difference is, if you go back to the original My Valentine, Paul singing that in his more natural voice, there's a few songs on Kisses on the Bottom where it's that voice and not the whispering voice. Whereas here, it's the whispering voice. And he does it well compared to Barbara, who's still in top form as far as I'm concerned. She's amazing. I mean, she's, I think, the same age as Paul in her early 80s, and she could still sing like gold. She's amazing. When you counter that with Paul not at full strength and not sustaining notes like he used to do, which is also something that bothers me, it's a little worrisome, but at the same time, I'm glad that the two of them got together just to do anything. But what I like most is when they harmonize together. Just knowing it's those two voices singing at the same time, and this is the only time we're probably ever going to get that, makes me treasure this recording. And I like the arrangement too. Okay, but it's a very good song. I'm glad that they did it. It's real tough for me to say which one is better. Over time, I might like this newer version more, but I do like the original quite a lot of My Valentine. And I always said, and this is like a departure from this particular conversation, when Kisses on the Bottom came out and you had this song and you had the other original, Only Our Hearts, which is also done in a classic vein, like a standard. I think Only Our Hearts was such a better song than My Valentine to begin with. But I like My Valentine. He's tried to make it a staple by performing it in every tour. I don't know what to say about Paul's voice that hasn't been said by us and by so many other podcasts at this point. For someone who you say doesn't have the voice anymore, he's still giving you a 3 hour concert, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it. And I've listened to a lot of his concerts online. And there are times when he doesn't sound strong. There are times when he does make it through a song fine. It's you never can tell with him. It's not totally destroyed. I remember a few years ago when he did Glastonbury, his voice sounded really strong during Glastonbury. So to write off his voice totally and say it's not what it was, I kind of wish that he would do this in the voice that he did in 2012 with My Valentine. I don't know if he can, although he's done it live. So I don't know. This was the approach that he took, but I'm still glad that he did it. All right. One last bit of news. In addition to the next leg of Ringo's All-Star Band Tour beginning June 12th in Bridgeport, Connecticut, that's at the Hartford Healthcare Amphitheater, Ringo shows no sign of slowing down as he's just added 11 more shows for a fall tour, beginning September 10th in Chicago at the Chicago Theater, ending September 27th, the last of 6 dates that he will do at the Venetian Hotel in Las Vegas. Kind of a shame that Love is not running there. You know, they ended its run recently. Imagine going there to see Ringo and seeing Love at the same time. That would have been a blast. But he's still at it, still going strong with all these tours. It's such a great thing still that Ringo and Paul are touring, and you know they're doing it out of sheer love for doing it. And that's all the news we have this time.
Bring on the guest.
Okay. And as promised, we have a very special guest with us here on Things We Said Today. It's Chris O'Dell. And you probably know Chris for a number of things. For a song called Miss O'Dell, which was a George Harrison B-side, the B-side to his single Give Me Love. And she also worked for the Beatles and was kind of a personal assistant, I should say, for Peter Asher, and also later on worked with the Rolling Stones, worked with Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young when they were touring for the Rolling Stones and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and a whole bunch of other people, Genesis. We'll get into all of it. But she has a new documentary out, which is called, guess what? Miss O'Dell.
Oh.
And so we welcome her to Things We Said Today. Hello, Chris.
Hello there, gentlemen. How are you today?
We're doing fine.
Good, good. Me too.
You're probably familiar with at least two of us because I know Darren interviewed you on stage at the Fest for Beatle fans, and
Yeah.
I interviewed you many years ago on another Beatles podcast called Fab Forum. That's when your book came out from Miss O'Dell.
Oh, Miss Odell also.
Yeah.
So we've all watched the new documentary and we've all been enjoying it. And I just want to start by asking, what was the process like of who you decided to have interviewed in the film? And were Paul and Ringo approached in any way?
Interesting question. Actually, to the latter part, no, we didn't approach either of them. It felt like I wanted it to be my documentary, and not. I mean, the minute you pull in somebody else, it's all about them all of a sudden. I've discovered that over the years. Patty was obvious because she's one of my dearest friends, and we did all the filming in London, so that made it kind of easy. Um, Kevin Harrington was someone I wanted to bring back into the picture. And Mal's kids was his children were very important for me to have in the documentary. I was so grateful to have Whispering Bob Harris.
Mhm.
And he was set up more by Simon Weitzman, the director, and also Debbie, the receptionist, her daughter was set up by Simon. Am I forgetting anyone? I don't know.
Peter
Everybody
Asher
Ray Dag,
who?
Ray Dag.
and Peter Asher.
Oh, that was, well, oh, and Leslie Cavendish is still a
Yeah.
good friend. Oh, yeah, Peter. Oh, gosh. I should never forget Peter. I owe him so much. That was kind of my idea. And there was something else. Oh, Ray Dag. No, I can thank Simon for that. And
Hmm.
that is one of my favorite parts of the documentary is him, because you don't get to hear that story very
Right.
often.
And
Yeah.
for those that don't know, he was the cop who stopped the Beatles from performing on the Apple rooftop. Um, this actually, if Simon was here, I would definitely ask him this question. But there were times when you used actual footage of the Beatles in the documentary, and then there were times when there was animation.
Mhm.
So how was that sorted out? I noticed there was no use of Beatles songs, probably because there was a cost involved with that. But why use animation in certain sections and real footage in others?
Well, a lot of it is about being able to use stuff legally.
Right.
That's a huge thing. And Beatles stuff is always expensive to obtain. So you're right about the music. We did use Miss Odell, but we could only use a certain amount of it. And the graphics are kind of a new thing in documentaries, I'm finding out.
Hmm.
So actually the guy who did the graphics lives here in Arizona, which is amazing. And Simon knew him. But I really think as I got understood it, it's that the graphics are really helpful when you can't actually provide the pictures. And I'm seeing it more and more in docs. So yeah, it didn't bother me. I didn't always like the way that I was depicted or the Hells Angels were depicted in the graphics, but you at least we had some photos around that too.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting in a way that when you were talking about the Beatles on the Apple rooftop, you didn't see the actual footage of the Beatles, but yet you saw the people in the street that you could use.
When we could use that because that was public. It wasn't a private, it was public, somebody recording it from the street. So it was easy to use that. But there's just so much about documentary making that I've learned because of this. And one of it is that an average documentary right now can cost over $1 million
Hmm.
easily. Mine did not. We did it on a lot less of a budget, which was fun. I mean, to me, Simon was a magician to be able to get as much as he did under the constraints we were under in terms of budgeting and usage.
Right. And to me, all the people who were interviewed all added so much to this documentary. But I know you have to ask this question. It's the one you've probably been asked the most, but how did you get your start to eventually end up working with the Beatles?
I met Derek Taylor. I was living in LA. I ran away from home and went from Tucson to LA. And I met Derek through an A&R man, that's artist and repertoire man,
Hmm.
at A&M Records. And basically, he didn't drive. And so I thought, well, this is one of the most interesting people I've ever met. His way with words, everything about him was so intriguing. So I said, I'll drive you everywhere. I'll take you. His wife and children had gone back to London. And I said, I'll drive you around. So I quit my job and I drove him. And at the end, he said, you really should come to London. And I thought, like, yeah. In this lifetime, I don't think so. But he kept calling me, and I think I wrote this in the book that I was living with an actress it's in the documentary, with an actress named Terry Garr, who
Yes.
was just kind of she was a dancer I can't even think of the shows she was on, but it was the music shows. And
Laughing? Was
what
it
was
laughing? Was she on laughing?
no, she wasn't on Laugh-In. She was dancing in some of the shows that were really popular, music shows where they had
Okay.
artists.
Okay.
She
I
was a
think by that
disco.
time she had already made an appearance on Star Trek as well. Uh,
Had she?
yes, she was the one where Kirk and Spock went back in time, and she was the secretary, and her great moment was Spock was wearing a hat because he's in the 20th century and nobody knows what a Vulcan is, and she pushes the hat off and she says, "What are you?"
Oh, I never knew that. Thank you for that.
Oh.
Actually, someone sent me her biography. I think it's autobiography. And I thought, oh my gosh, I got to read this because there's so much like that I didn't know about Terry. But we remained friends for years after that. And I give her a lot of credit for saying, you need to go. That's all she had to say. You need to go.
Mhm.
Hmm. Now, what was it that Derek saw in you? I know before you met him, you worked at another record company, Dot Records, for a while. Did that have any influence as to him thinking about working for him?
Nothing at all. And then I worked for a guy who did a tip sheet, which
Yeah.
was very popular back in those days,
Right.
telling radio stations what's coming out, blah, blah, blah. And I really didn't learn that much at that point. So it wasn't because I had all this working experience. I think he liked my personality, to be honest. I think he just felt, Derek would bring, I wasn't the only person Derek brought into the inner sanctum of the Beatles, but he was very careful about who he brought in and knew who would be okay and who wouldn't by their personalities. And I was pretty easygoing.
Yeah.
So he knew I wasn't going to flip out and fall on the floor, go crazy for the Beatles.
There's a story in the documentary, it's also in your book, about you were determined to give Derek, he asked you to get cigarettes or a box of cigarettes, and you had to follow him at, what was it, the end of his route on the plane to give it
No,
to
he was leaving LA. It was
him?
his goodbye, and he was going back to London to work for Apple, basically.
Yeah,
He had been their press agent when they were touring in America and all over the world. He was with them, and then he quit and came to the States for about 5 years, I think. And oh yeah, he sent me, we were at the airport and we had been at a party, a going away party for him at Ciro's. And everybody was pretty messed up, including Derek and me. And I don't know if his secretary was. But she went to the airport with us. And the plane, he sent me for cigarettes. And when I got back, the plane was gone. And, it was like 20 years old. I thought, well, that's not a good buy. So I had the carton of cigarettes in my hand, and I looked at his secretary and said, it stopped in San Francisco for like an hour or so.
yeah,
So I flew to San Francisco with the cigarettes. I had to borrow her shoes, which were about a size too big for me, and I'm hair all over the place from the party. And I show up at the airport and go to no, it would never happen today, but I go to the desk and they said, no, we can't let you on. I started crying, but I didn't make it up. I mean, I was pretty exhausted. We'd been up all night and I did all this flying to get there before he left. So I took, they let me on and I took the cigarettes inside and said, here they are. And he was like, so I don't know, maybe that had something to do with it.
Hey,
well,
try to get on a plane today to drop off cigarettes to a passenger,
Wouldn't happen.
right? And you mentioned in the movie that you lost your shoes at the party that you were at, right? Yeah.
I couldn't find them anywhere. Well, it was dark.
That happens to me all the time. Anyway,
I
Ken.
know. Thank you. It makes me feel better. Thank you.
okay, we're all going to take turns asking you questions, so
Okay.
we pass you over to Alan.
Okay. Um, I once had a chat with an EMI engineer named John Kurlander, and he was a young engineer at the time of, say, Abbey Road. He just started working, and he worked with the Beatles, and he told me something interesting, and uh, it they may have behaved differently with women than with men. But his experience was, he said, each of the Beatles individually was really great. They were funny, they were great to be with, friendly. It was wonderful. If two of them were together, it was still pretty good. If three of them were together, it got a little bit dicey. And if four of them were together, they were the most horrible people in the world because they would close ranks and everybody who wasn't one of them was an outsider. Was that something that you noticed as well, or did they take a
Well,
different approach with
I mean,
women?
I think from his point of view, I can see where he would feel that way because around that time in the late 60s, Brian Epstein had just passed, not that long before I went over, and Um, he really kept them well protected. That was part of his job. The inner circle was really small. And I think that was so ingrained not only in them, but in their wives or
Hmm.
their partners that you just didn't tell people any stories outside. You didn't go to hang out with them. I mean, the secretaries at Apple were told they couldn't even go to parties that the Beatles were at. That's how strict Brian was. And so I think that that still was clear in their head. And when the four of them were together, they were back as the Beatles. I
Mhm.
don't think they felt that way individually, but then they were back as the Beatles. It was very different. I mean, I think I told this in my documentary, talked about going into the studio. I assumed I could just go.
Mhm.
I was at Apple and everybody said Paul said hi every day. So I thought, well, I can go into the studio, but that wasn't the case. And the girl said, no, there's a rule. You can't do that. Well, I thought that was ridiculous. Why couldn't I go into the studio? I'm here. So I went to the studio. Mal said I could come. Paul said, go talk to Mal. Mal said, yeah, come on down. I would have never gotten out of reception, the DMI, if one of John's friends hadn't come in and finally said, oh, do you want to go in the studio?
Mhm.
But never would have gotten through that with Mal, who was the gatekeeper to the Beatles.
Mhm. So you did get in,
I did. He
and
took me downstairs into the studio, a door through there. And actually, we were not going to bother anybody, except that John and Yoko came down the stairs a few minutes later from the control room, and they were going to put clapping on Revolution
Revolution.
#1. I've missaid that before myself. I thought it was 9, but it just hit me this year. No, it was 1. That's where the clapping was.
so that was the session you were at.
Yeah, my first Beatles session.
So did you get
Did
to
you
go to
mention,
others?
I accidentally mentioned nine in the film, and I'm thinking, wow, that's some way to be introduced into the studio. This is my
Yeah.
first Beatles song.
Well, it was 1, which was a
Okay.
little filler, you know. And then I clapped. I wasn't afraid to clap. I knew I could. So I was on a Beatle record the first time I went in. That's pretty cool if you
That's pretty
think of
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
it.
And did you get to go to other sessions as well?
I got to the point where I kind of just got in. They just knew me. I would bring things from Peter to one of them. I would do a lot of that. Peter would say, take Paul this, take George this, blah, blah, blah. So I was going back and forth to the point where sometimes I'd just go in to sit and listen.
Hmm.
And I don't know how I got away with it, to be honest. I mean, I think about it now and I thought, geez, I'm surprised they let me do that. But also, that was during the White Album. They were in the studio a lot on their own.
Hmm.
So when George did Savoy Truffle, there were no other Beatles there. And it wasn't a big deal to hang out with him, you know. So that happened quite a lot.
Hmm. Um, can one surmise that he was the one you were friendliest with, seeing as you ended up in working for him? It must have been,
Oh,
uh,
George, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Pisces. We were all Pisces, George, Patty, me. So there was that kind of similarity between our personalities. I know that sounds weird, but it's true.
Hmm.
And yeah, we just kind of connected early on when I was working there and became friends after that. Paul was the one I was around most in the first, like probably couple months that I was there, maybe 6 months, because he was there every single day.
Hmm.
In fact, I stayed at his house one night I mean, there was John and Yoko were staying there and his best and John's friend Pete Shotton was there. So all stayed over at Paul's house. And the next morning, Paul and he said, you want to go to work? We were both going to Apple. And he said, you want to go to work with me? And I went, okay, we'll go together. And we got on a damn bus,
Huh.
a city bus. And I'm thinking, oh my God. And this was like 68. So they were still pretty recognizable.
Hmm.
No one did anything. I mean, we just stood there for a while. That was it.
Hmm. Um,
Crazy.
In your book, you wrote about, and you talked in the film as well, about George's housewarming party at Friar Park.
Mhm.
And in the book, you had said that actually all four Beatles were there, and was that the case?
No,
Okay,
I didn't lie. I just misremembered.
right.
And
Yeah.
I kind of knew that after I wrote it, and I was thinking about it because Peter and Mary Frampton were there.
Mm.
And Mary and I are very good friends. And she told me, we kind of reconnected a few years ago, and she said, no, I don't think Paul was there. Actually, George was there. Ringo was there. I know those two were there for sure. I have memories of that. But the other two, I don't think, I mean, they maybe have been invited. I don't know, but they didn't come. It was Patty's birthday party,
Oh, Patty's birthday. Okay.
but also an opportunity. George didn't want to do a party, but it was also an opportunity for everybody to see this amazing house he just purchased.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Um, Richard DeLello in his book, and he's not in the film, but you see him in a picture in the film at one point of everyone in Derek's office, I guess. Um, he talks about it really being just sort of like a big free-for-all in a way, and you get the impression from the film that, maybe it was, but was that your memory of it, or was it an actual sort of working place where everybody got stuff done as well? I mean, did you have actual duties that you needed to attend to and that kind of thing, apart from writing David Bowie rejection letters?
That was fun, but I didn't know I did it. Actually, it was both of those things. It was kind of crazy, but we got a lot of work done, if you can believe that. Um, if you think about it, almost everybody working there were still in their 20s, including the Beatles.
Mm.
That's pretty young. You put a bunch of 20 to 28 years old, 8-year-olds into a building, they're going to have fun. That's just the nature of the game. The adults were like Peter Brown and Ron Cass. Those were the adults in the room,
Mhm.
but they didn't really. I mean, Paul, if anyone, was the one that tried to calm things down there and save money and sort of cut out all the drinking that went on at work. I
Mm.
mean, people would come in on acid, but they still got their job done.
Okay. I should turn you
I'm
over to
not talking
Darren.
quality here.
Oh, oh,
I'll
Darren?
turn you over to Darren at this point.
I was going to say, I wonder what would happen if the three of us did acid and did a show together, how it would come out. That might be an experiment for the future. I don't mean to be jumping around, but there's so many questions I have to ask after watching the film. And I always take interviews in a sort of a chronological manner. But here, I just want to touch on all these little topics. One of the really sweet parts of the film was when you connected with, and I don't have her last name here, but Debbie from Apple with her daughter. And I know her
Yeah.
daughter's name was Natalie Scarf, so I don't know if Debbie's last name was also Scarf.
No, it wasn't. That's her married name. And do you know, I cannot remember it at this moment. Isn't that funny? I was thinking the other day, I went, what was Debbie's last name? I knew it,
Well, it
but
was a very poignant memory because you could tell that you and Debbie were close, were good friends at Apple, and decades had passed, and now you were reconnecting with her daughter. Not reconnecting, connecting with her daughter for the first time. And you could tell that her daughter really enjoyed hearing the stories about her mom. Um, so Debbie was always down at the front desk, correct? So I guess in the Get Back movie, when the cops are milling around in the lobby, and Jimmy the doorman's kind of milling around with them, and then Mal will come and go. That Debbie was she in any of the camera shots with sitting down at the front desk? I don't know
no,
if there is a
I,
woman there.
that would have been Debbie. And there was a camera in a box, kind of like they built this box. So it's it's, I think for sure that that was Debbie. If it was downstairs at the desk, it was her.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Now, to the Hells Angels arrival at Apple, tell us a little bit of the background, if you know what the background is. Why were they there?
Well,
And who opened the door, not literally, but who kind of started the invitation that allowed the Hells Angels to come and invade downtown London and go to the Apple, just stroll into the Apple office?
the short answer is George. He was in America hanging out with Dylan and spending some time in the States, and somewhere he met them. And knowing George, he probably said, "Oh, well, if you're ever in London, let me know." They heard that he invited them to Apple. So they arrived, but they didn't arrive alone. They arrived with Rock Scully, who was at that point working with the Grateful Dead. He was a big part of the
Oh,
Grateful Dead. Peter Wolf, apparently. And I don't even remember him, but he was with them when they arrived, I found out. And a girl named Frankie Hart, who not long after working, she stayed and actually worked with George for a while. And she went back and got and was with Bobby Weir of the Grateful Dead for quite a while too. So, and two Hells Angels. It wasn't like the whole
okay. I was going to
fleet.
say it sounded like somebody opened up uh, a a box and all these mice came running out all over the building. But
No,
you ended up
it was Sweet William and
that was right.
Frisco Pete,
Frisco Pete, and who was the third name you gave?
Rock Scully. Did I?
Yeah, it might have been right.
Well, the other person who came with them was Ken Kesey.
Oh, okay.
So they
Yeah.
all invaded together. They all arrived at the same time. And Ken took over an office, walked out with a typewriter at one point when he moved into his house in his rental. And the Angels were there every day. I mean, they were there, but they were there because they were going on their way to Czechoslovakia to straighten things out there. In the meantime, they disrupted Apple.
And how long, how many days are we talking?
You know, it's hard to remember time because it seems like those were years anyway. So, you know, they were there for a good few weeks easily. I can't remember. I mean, I don't remember exactly, but they were there over Christmas. They had a fight in the office, one of the press office with one of the journalists, knocked him out, or at least hit him. Yeah, it was pretty crazy. However, I was good friends with them.
Right. And they took you, one of them brought you on a nice little ride around London, you explain in the film.
We were stoned on, it was the first time I'd ever taken LSD. And it was with both of them and Frankie. And Sweet William said, "You want to go a ride on my bike?" And I thought this LSD was going to change my entire life, that I would be a completely different person. And in fact, all it did was scare me to death because he was going so fast and he was heading towards Harrods. I remember it well, seeing Harrods right in front of me. And then he did a U-turn. And boy, did we slide out. It was kind of scary, but it shouldn't have been. That they're pretty good on bikes.
Well,
So I
well.
hear.
And then once you got to know Peter Asher, and Peter was there as I guess the first A&R man at Apple. He introduces you to James Taylor.
Mhm.
And talk about James, what he was like then. I would imagine very different from the James Taylor of today, or at least of recent years. And Apple had some high hopes for James that never seemed to blossom like they expected. Talk a little bit about James.
James, I met like in the first few days I was there. Derek set me up with him just so I wouldn't be alone. And he came to my hotel room and I think we went out to eat. Then we came back and he had his guitar and he was writing Carolina on my mind at that time. So I can honestly say he wrote a little bit of it in my bathroom at that hotel because, yeah, for good acoustics. James was shy. He was exceedingly shy. He also had just had a bout with heroin and was getting off of it. So, knowing as a drug counselor, knowing how drugs are, he was probably not in the best state at that point. But he was writing, he always was rehearsing with the band for the recordings and everything. He just didn't have a lot to say.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And you talked about when Peter Asher decided uh, with Alan Klein's arrival that things were going to change at Apple. So Peter left, brought James Taylor with him, and gave you the opportunity, if you wanted, you could have also at some point joined Peter in California.
Well, I did, in fact, but not immediately.
No.
He took I think I went back over in 1970. I went to work for Peter again in 70 or
Was that
71.
around the time you said you went off with Leon Russell as well, and that was when you kind of left Apple temporarily?
No, Leon was before, and when I came back is when Alan Klein had taken over
Okay.
completely. And
Okay.
that's when George invited me to live at Friar Park. And then after living there, I was at Eric Clapton's house painting his kitchen. That Derek and the Dominoes were on tour and I was bored. So I decided to paint his kitchen without telling him. Um, Orange and yellow. And in the midst of painting, Peter Asher called me. I've never asked him how he knew where I was, but he called me and asked me if I wanted to come back to LA and work for him. And I said yes. So I put the paintbrush down and off I went.
Did you finish at least the painting?
I
Did you
don't
finish the
remember.
room?
I don't
Okay.
remember. But they redid it after that. I
Oh,
mean,
okay.
they totally redid it.
I was going to say Eric probably came home and never even noticed anything had changed, possibly.
Very possible.
One more random story I'd like you to shed a little light on, which I got a kick out of, was um, Chris O'Dell slept in the ladies' lounge in Trident Studios. Huh? Explain explain that how that happened because that was pretty fun story.
Well, it was during the night that George was recording Savoy Truffle. He was putting the vocal on. And so I went in there and he said, "Oh, stay." And we had a bottle of wine and or a couple, and we would go down to the studio. He'd sing, we'd come up to listen again, and we were drinking the whole time. And I guess I reached my limit. So I just said, "Well, I have to go I'll be right back," going to the ladies' room. And it was so nice because EMI Studios, now called Abbey Road Studios, had a beautiful, big, fluffy sofa in the powder room. And I thought, well, I'm just going to lay down a minute. And the next thing I know, it was time to go to work. And I got up and went, whoa, this is not good. So I mean, later I denied it. I only told the truth on this documentary because George said, "Where'd you go?" "Oh, I went home."
Uh-huh.
But I slept the full night. The engineer said, "Where were you? They were looking for you." And I went, "Well, they obviously didn't come in the women's room, ladies' restroom." So yeah.
I don't know how many ladies were around that night, but clearly nobody wanted to disturb you if they did see you
No,
sleeping there.
no, when the Beatles recorded at EMI Studios, no, but they had the whole studios. They had
Mhm.
all the studios, so nobody else could record when they were there.
I mentioned Trident. I meant Abbey Road was the ladies' lounge. Um, all right, so more of Chris O'Dell, This Is Your Life in a couple of seconds. Let me throw it back to Ken Michaels.
All right, thank you. You know, this whole period of working at Apple, and it's a fascinating thing to study because, we talk about Apple Records, but Apple was really a conglomerate, and you had a film division and a publishing division and a closed division. And I'm just wondering, for four guys who basically were musicians and artists to suddenly jump into this venture, did you observe between the four of them, was it too much for them? Was it too much pressure? Because I know I remember hearing that once Alan Klein took over, Paul wasn't around like he was before.
Absolutely not.
And when it came to the music, certainly if you were to look at all the artists on Apple Records, George and Ringo did the most as far as, playing, producing on artists like Doris Troy, Jackie Lomax, Billy Preston,
Mhm.
whereas John kind of kept to Yoko and, well, David Peel. There's just a few artists there,
Mhm.
and Paul had Mary Hopkin, did a little work with James Taylor, held Badfinger, as did George. But overall, George and Ringo did the most. But in talking about everything that encompassed Apple, were they very excited about all these divisions, or was it like too much to take on? How did they react to all of this?
Well, my thinking is that, I mean, because it wasn't long after I got there that they closed the Apple boutique
Yeah.
down near Wigmore Street on Baker Street,
Mhm.
and gave all the merchandise away. We got to go first. Those of us at Apple got to, after the
Hmm.
Beatles and their friends had done it, then we got to go in and get whatever we wanted, but they gave it all away. It's hard to believe. That was obviously too much. It wasn't well managed and it wasn't making any money. So I think they were excited about the idea at the beginning, but things started to not be as exciting fairly quickly. I think they believed Magic Alex was going to do something in amazing and create these amazing recording things. And of
Mhm.
course, he didn't. His idea of an eight, well, you guys know this, the idea of an 8-track studio was 8 speakers on the wall, which isn't exactly what that's about. So they got disillusioned with that. The publishing was Apple Publishing. It wasn't the Beatles publishing. And that was just a couple people doing that.
Hmm.
And the records were really the main thing, which makes
Right.
sense. It's what they should have been doing. And I think they did, they used it as well as they could during that time, but it wasn't making money. They should have kept James Taylor. That's what
Yeah.
I,
No
And
kidding.
maybe sign David Bowie.
and maybe some David Bowie. Yeah, who knew?
Now, when it came to signing artists, some of them were the Beatles' own friends, obviously. But was it all Peter Asher listening to all the recordings coming in?
He
Because
did.
I read that there was a book that Norman Smith put out many years ago, and he not only mentioned David Bowie, but he also said Queen was turned down by
Crosby, Stills,
Apple.
and Nash were
I don't
turned down.
remember that.
Yeah, yes.
Crosby, Stills, and Nash were.
Yeah. That one.
Yeah, how was that? Was that Peter's decision? He probably left by then.
No, actually, it was Paul, I think, who turned them down. I mean, I don't know. Actually, I don't know that. They met with Paul and spoke with Paul, but then they went to Apple and they were rejected. And honestly, I think that at first it was everybody found their favorite and who they wanted to work with. Paul more so than anyone, he got Billy Preston, Doris Troy into Apple. Um,
Mary
and they
Hop
would listen. Who?
Mary Hopkin.
Oh, well, Paul did that. Paul brought Mary Hopkins in. I think that when Ron Cass was there, there was more of the listening to outside stuff. Peter had a guy who did nothing, named Nigel, who did nothing but sit and listen to tapes all day. So it wasn't Peter listening, but if he'd find a good one, he would take it to Peter, and then Peter would take it down to Ron Cass at that time. But
Hmm.
behind every signing, there had to be a Beatle going along with it. It was almost a unspoken requirement.
Hmm. Now, did you
I
have
also
any?
heard Jethro Tull. I'm sorry. I think I also had heard Jethro Tull was a candidate or was trying to get in, but
That is a whole book. That's amazing.
Yeah, I know I asked Peter several years ago when I interviewed him about Crosby, Stills and Nash, and he couldn't remember, you know.
He didn't remember that. Well, he may not have been aware of it. I was living in a flat that was shared. Graham and his agent from William Morris shared this flat. And Graham was in America coming, putting CSN together. And so I took over, I rented his room. So I was there when they came back with the reel to reel. And they played it and everything. And I heard them talking about it because I was right there. And they would say, they had, first they had Mike McCartney, well, he's Mike something else, but Mike McCartney, Paul's brother, came over, and then Paul came over and they listened to it. So I can't say Paul turned them down because what I remember is they went to Apple and came back and said no, they didn't want to sign him.
Hmm. Okay. Did you have any dealings yourself directly with Alan Klein?
Oh yeah. Yes. He and I really, I mean, I don't think he said a word to me at the beginning, but when I was living out at George's, he came out there a few times, once with Phil Spector, and then I got to know him a little. And then after that, he was nice to me. But yeah, I didn't really know him. I know what I know about him. Let's put it that way, from that whole experience. And what a bad choice that was.
Yeah. Okay. Since you mentioned Phil Spector, there's
Oh,
one little tidbit there in this documentary that I never knew before about you and Phil Spector, that he drew a gun to your head.
yeah. But I was one of many, and fortunately, I wasn't the last.
Yeah, as we know.
That was his control game. But I also, at that time, I was seeing a hypnotherapist for my therapy. And when I described Phil's behavior to him, he said, oh, he's schizophrenic, paranoid schizophrenic. And that's true. That's what it was. But who knew back then? Nobody
Yeah.
thought about mental health.
Right. Plus,
Where
he's
did
a
that incident happen?
Um, oh gosh, you're asking me to remember times. Let me see. It would have been in the 70s, sometime in the 70s.
But where? Where were you? Where was
Oh,
this?
oh, we were at an Italian restaurant on Sunset Strip.
Okay.
He and I often did that. I would go out with him a lot. We'd hang out
A-
together.
And you just pulled the gun out and pointed it to your head.
Yeah, like that. Yeah. But I didn't like it didn't scare me. It
Mhm.
because there was a restaurant full of people. And I just assumed, well, he'd never do it. I mean, I didn't think he'd ever do it for a kickoff. I thought he was just being weird.
Mhm.
Did
hmm.
you
Yeah.
see The Godfather?
Well, Phil didn't seem that way, but he was strange. He was definitely strange. But I
Well,
liked him. I actually really liked Phil a lot.
you hear so much about him being a genius, and maybe you thought this was part of him, his eccentric side.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, I just thought, okay, he's kind of crazy, but look at him. He's amazing what he does. And I actually had fun. We laughed a lot. He had a great sense of humor. So, yeah, yeah, I really did like him.
I just want to ask about the artists on Apple Records because, I've said many times about Badfinger, for all the success they had, they should have had 10 times as much success because they were that talented. But they had so many really good albums. James Taylor's first album, Jackie Lomax, Is This What You Want? The two that Billy Preston did. Mary Hopkin, her first album did fairly well. But most of the artists really didn't have the success that they deserved. And when you take a look at what James Taylor became, and also Billy Preston, the success he had, especially in the 70s. Even the Hot Chocolate Band, who only had one single on Apple Records, had hits in the 70s. Why do you suppose that didn't happen at Apple? Why
Um,
couldn't
yeah,
it?
good. question, but not necessarily my answer. I read somewhere about that and I thought, oh, that's really true. They never put anyone on tour. Nobody ever went on tour. And so all you got was a record, but then that was it. That was the extent of what you actually got to know about them. So I think that was a big mistake that there was no touring. There was a representative at Capitol Records, Ken Mansfield,
Right.
who certainly they were doing the marketing and everything. But James, when he came to Warner Brothers and started working, he went on tour immediately. He was on tour all the time and he came out well. But Jackie never, I don't think, well, if Jackie didn't tour during that period, Billy didn't tour during that period, nobody toured.
It's a good answer. Although Badfinger did tour the US.
They did, but they had also had crazy management problems. I mean, that was something totally different with them as their management.
Yeah. All right. Alan, back to you.
Okay. Um, I'm just wondering what the difference in the culture of Apple versus, say, working with the Rolling Stones. What was the culture of those two groups by comparison?
That's such a great question. And it's such a, it makes so much sense. I loved working for the Stones. I was their personal assistant for a year before I went on tour. I didn't go on tour as a tour person. I went on tour because Keith and Mick and Bill Wyman wanted me there. And all I did was take care of their needs, mostly Keith and I got their laundry at night and their cleaning and you know different things, but I just adored working for them. The difference was there were a lot of drugs,
Mm.
and um, that had a lot to do with it. It was just a different personality. The band was, I thought of the Beatles as, I mean, this is kind of stupid, but there you go. At that time, I thought of the Beatles as being these really nice guys your mom would want you to go out with. And isn't this what they said about the Stones anyway? And I knew that my mom probably wouldn't want me to go out with any of the Stones. So they just were they were just more spontaneous, and the drugs were pretty prevalent at that time.
Mhm. During that period of the Stones was when I think Mick Taylor was there, right? Did he seem to sort of mesh with them at that point yet? Because he didn't stay for very long.
No, he didn't, and he was such a great addition to that band at that time, in my own personal opinion. I thought he really fit. He just seemed young, and that sort of felt like he never did he ever fit in? In a way, not. Even though he certainly did what he had to do to be a part of all of it. It just was bringing, that's why Ronnie Wood fits so good. They already knew him,
Mhm.
and
Hmm.
he was already a friend of Keith, particularly, where Mick Taylor just kind of came in not really knowing any of them.
Okay. Um, so living at Friar Park, it's kind of fascinating that you and Patty have, became really good friends and have remained really good friends because I once interviewed Nancy Andrews, and she was talking about how, she went to visit George, and he immediately hit on her. And at one point, she was, I guess, in a ladies' room with Patty, and Patty sort of called over to her in the next stall, and she said, "Did George try to hit on you?" And she said, "Yes." And she said, "He hits on all my girlfriends." So, that must have been a little tense. I mean, because she's in the film, she's obviously felt unthreatened, by you, and you've been friends and remained friends. I mean, was that a difficult balancing act?
Well, when I went to Far Park, the night I arrived there, I'm not even sure Patty knew I was coming. And so imagine that. Um, she told me within a couple days because we just kind of meshed. And she told me, you can either be my friend or you can sleep with George. And it wasn't hard to figure out that my friendship with her was going to last a lot longer than sleeping with George was going to last. So, um, that's what kept us friends was the fact, and not that George didn't try, bless his heart, he just couldn't help himself. He would try, but it was, at some point he became like such a brother type figure in my life that it was just easy to say, oh, stop it, don't be ridiculous.
That'd be ridiculous.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, you talk in the film about touring with Linda Ronstadt and how that was the only time when you had problems with the men on the tour, but the problems you were talking about is just not taking you seriously because you were a woman. Um, Things have changed, I think, since then, but you're well out of the music business. And do you ever think about going back?
I went back on tour with Linda in 2004.
Hmm.
I was getting my master's degree in mental health counseling.
Right.
And she said, I want you to go on tour with me. And I said, well, I can't. I'm getting my master's degree. That's a different world. I don't belong there. And she said, oh, please. Well, if Linda says, "Oh, please, you do. You say, okay. So I did go out we did two tours, a East Coast and a West Coast tour, small,
Hmm.
but, and everybody was straight and just doing their job and going to bed early. And that was great. But it was hard work still. I just went, oh, this is too much. I don't want to do this anymore. You give up a lot of yourself in that position. You have to know what they're going to ask for next. I mean, that when I toured with all the bands, you had to be ahead of them
Hmm.
and know what was coming. And, if you made a mistake, it was so like, don't fire me. I mean, there was a lot of tension involved in that. And there wasn't necessarily on that other tour, but I just realized I didn't have the desire to be knowing what, and I love Linda, but I just didn't have the desire to do that again.
Hmm.
That's so codependent.
Mm.
So how did you get them the guy who wasn't taking you seriously? How did you handle that situation and get him to take you seriously?
I think I just, I tried to be friendly to him. And eventually, I think he just gave up because it was obvious Linda wanted me there. And if he wanted to be there, he shouldn't upset her. And by the end of the tour, I think we were okay. But it would be, I would ask him to do something and he would literally say no. I mean, he was pretty blatant about not wanting to have to report to a woman. But I was the only woman basically on tours at that time,
Hmm.
except for girlfriends and wives. I
Mhm.
usually was the only woman. So it was hard on him. I get it. Now I get it. Yeah.
Um, how did you decide to go into get your master's in mental health care?
Well, I had my son and we moved back to Tucson
Mhm.
and I had already learned how to do hypnotherapy. And I found I actually, if you want to know the truth, it was kind of a natural step from working with musicians and all of that to listening to people who had problems. It kind of just all fit. I think it was a natural transition. And I was in recovery. And so I had to get my bachelor's degree first because I hadn't really gone to college after high school. And then I got my master's degree. And I was raising my son and working at that time, but I was working at a treatment center. So then I just kind of rolled into actually working there as a counselor.
Mhm. Did you then have a private practice?
Eventually I had a private practice. Yeah.
Okay. I'll turn you back to
And
Darren.
you're still doing that now?
No, I'm retired from that. that's, I mean, I'll still help anybody. I still, if you want to come and talk to me about a problem, that's great. But now I do it mostly on myself.
I think we all need help. So we're
Yeah.
all going to be
Yeah.
calling.
You could hypnotize all three of us now and just leave us in a state of being hypnotized and just sign off and
A trance. You want me to leave you in trance state?
come back in 24 hours and see what kind of shape we're in.
But
Um,
then my podcast won't come. Then this won't come out. Why would I do that?
um, I think we talked about your time at Friar Park at the Fest for Beatles fans because and this about a year ago I had the opportunity to well go outside the gates for a few pictures and see what it was like and see that I liked your story about when you first arrived. You saw the first guest house that is on your left when you enter the gates, and you thought it was a lovely house, George. And it was like, no, just it's just one house. What was it? It was the
It
guest. It
was
was
the front lodge.
the front lodge, right? And his
Oh,
brother
the
lived
front
there.
lodge, and his brother Harry lived there, or
And if you,
Harold.
if anyone ever goes there, you look down this road, and you know if you have an idea of what the land and the building, the castle, if you will, is like, the mansion rather. The road just goes on and just disappears off to the right. You talk about the making that trek for the very first time. I was fascinated when you said the state of at least the state of Friar Park, maybe before you got there. Or maybe it was still in somewhat of a state of disarray, but never realizing that when George bought this this almost like this wonderland of a mansion, it was not at the time that George first put the key in the door for the first time.
Yes, Patty found it. And
Oh, okay.
she saw the whimsicalness of it and knew that George, I think she loved it. She saw it as a place where she eventually would like to have parties and concerts and, art shows. That's how she saw it. He saw it as a way to get away where no one could get to him. And it was perfect because he could stay inside Fire Park forever and just do gardening and fixing things up. But when they got there, it was worse than it was worse. They had to do some cleaning up. I think I came in a month or two after they'd moved in though. And there was no furniture. Oh, wait, you went to live with the Beatles? Yeah, I slept on the floor in a sleeping bag. That's how great it was. No heat, no heat. The one big fireplace in the main hall was what kept everything warm. And then Patty found and George found some cots in the garden shed that had been stacked there. So then they had a mattress that they brought to sleep on. But then Terry Doran and myself had a bed. We now had a cot. So we got to have our own room. It was pretty basic. And George was very focused on getting it back to what it initially was. And there were two housekeepers who had actually worked at the house for a long, long time. So they helped him, reminded him of he could see the lakes had all been covered up. It was it was a place, it was owned by the Catholic Church, and kids went there during World War II to get out of London. So the nuns covered everything that they could have, the lakes, anything that could have gotten them into that were dangerous to
Mhm,
kids.
mhm,
He undid all of that, basically.
mhm.
Yeah.
I think I had asked you, and in all seriousness, because it sounds funny, could you get lost in there, and did you?
I don't know that I still have trouble with the top floor. We went up there a few times, but
First of all, how many floors are there?
there
Do you
were
remember, recall?
Yeah, I'm thinking one, two, three, and the turret. Um, but I don't have I mean the Krishnas lived there and they were living on the third floor. And George and Patty they moved around as they were redoing the house. They had to move to different parts of Friar Park to live. And so it changed a lot from when I first went there to what it, even when I was still going there and I would go back and visit them, it had changed quite a lot. They had done a lot of work already. I haven't been there in years, so I can't imagine, but pictures I see, I think Olivia has continued to really make it what George had hoped for.
Hmm. I just picture myself being spooked at 3 in the morning, unable to find where I was sleeping,
Oh,
walking around in the dark with a candle.
it was spooky. It
Mm.
was very, I mean, Terry Dorn, who worked for George, swears he saw a ghost on the galley, walking along there. I mean, yeah, it was not fun to be on your own there. Or if you had to go to a room up on the first floor, which is where they were living, a lot of their bedrooms, their main bedrooms were, it was like, oh, run. Run. Well, a guy climbed in the window one night the first floor, or it would be the first floor in England, the second floor for us. And Richard DeLello went up, and there was a guy climbing through the window. He'd put a ladder up against the wall, and he's like, "Dude, what are you doing?" And the guy took off, and we called the police. And then, of course, the guy who snuck in and attacked George and
Mm.
Olivia. So it wasn't the most secure place. We
Mm.
now know.
Um, Chris, you're also known as one of the few people that was able to not only be on the roof when the Beatles performed, you were there for the entire performance.
Mhm.
Um, that day, well, it had been the culmination of a couple of weeks of them going downstairs to the basement studios for a while. And I would assume that up above in the floors above, it was business as usual for all the employees, as the band was downstairs working. Can you talk about the first time you heard about the possibility that they were going to go up to the roof? And I know that there was a lot of back and forth. They were, they weren't, right up to almost the moment that they did perform. What is your recollection of before the scenes, before you took your chair up on the roof to see the actual performance? What was going on downstairs in the days, hours, minutes beforehand?
Well, everything was, they were filming. Uh, and so that was a big part. They were recording downstairs, they were filming everything. The Beatles, I mean, they were there pretty much 6, 7 days a week doing this. I got to know Michael Lindsay Hogg, and I got to know Tony Richardson, who was the cameraman. And so I would hear them say, oh, they're talking about going to Cairo. They're talking about going to one of the greens somewhere in London and doing it there. They talked about all kinds. Oh, the Grand Canyon got thrown out there, which I was really happy about. So, because it's in Arizona. Uh, Um, but then the next thing I know is they said, well, they're going to do it on the roof. George did not want to travel. He didn't even want to be in the movie. I don't think. I think by that time he was just pretty done with everything. So, they sent out Peter Brown or someone sent out a memo saying that because the roof wasn't very steady, the employees weren't allowed up there. No employees could come up on the roof. They had to put up these, kind of props to make sure that that the roof didn't fall in to our floor. I was in the floor right beneath it.
Oh, they had to secure the ceiling.
Ah, yeah, 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 because the roof was just not in good shape. And it was Tony, the cameraman, who came by and said, well, do you want to come up? And I said, no, no, no. Only essential people are allowed up there. And he said, well, you're essential. You're my assistant. And I went, oh God, I hope I don't get kicked off. So I didn't bring a chair up. There was some kind of a bench underneath by the fire chimney,
Mhm.
and he just set me down on the end of this bench where his camera was. And then pretty soon Ken Mansfield came in from Capitol, and then Maureen, and then Yoko.
Okay.
And that was it. We were the audience for at least the very beginnings of it until people started coming out of the roof. And then eventually some people from Apple came up.
Hmm. So you actually were up there long before the band came up. They could very easily have been deciding we're not doing it, and it all got canceled. And you were already had your place upstairs, and we know that it was a cold day, so you really were exposed to the elements
Yes, it was
up
cold.
there even longer than the performance.
Yes. But actually, after Ken came up, then Ringo came and Maureen sat down and John came and Yoko and George came. They came up fairly quickly because they were only down in the basement in the studio. And it was cold. And if you really, and I know you've seen it 100 times, but Paul's wearing like a jacket.
Right? Yes, I've noticed that. Yeah.
Oh, crazy. I mean, the other three were like really like bundled up like all of us, but not Paul. I don't know how he did that.
Mm.
Right. And you also, from your vantage point, would have seen one at a time the police arriving.
I did.
And and I forget the officer's name that you had
Ray
in your
Dag,
film.
Ray Dag.
I've also, from having seen, of course, the original movie and Peter Jackson's documentary, was amazed at how there was an urgency and a desire and an urgency on the part of the police to stop the performance, but nobody seemed to be making the move to take matters into their own hands and be authoritarian and stop the performance. And Ray, you say his name was, he kind of
Ray Dag.
yeah, he kind of led on that there was a desire to kind of wrap this thing up because my boss told me to, but it was the Beatles and he was being talked to and cooled down by Mal Evans. You saw the police showing up at the door. What was your first impression when the first policeman showed up and you thought, was this it? Are they
I
going
think
to jail?
I think we knew they were coming. That's why the camera was in the lobby. I think that was kind of, let me just kind of put it into, Savile Row was the tailoring street. So the majority of people there wore top hats and suits, and they were, the elite, the upper crust part of London. And so when Apple even first bought that building, they were not too thrilled because we were so out of context of what Savile Row was. Not to mention the police station was only down the street, maybe
Mhm.
the equivalent of a block and a half.
Right.
So I think they pretty much knew that there were going to be complaints, and I think they kind of prepared for that. The funny thing, and I never hear it told, but Jimmy the doorman told me that when they first came to the door and knocked on the door because they had locked it, they said, "Do you realize that that is louder than a transistor radio?"
I would think so. Yeah.
One would hope.
No one's ever repeated that in anything I've ever read or seen, but Jimmy told me that, so I know it's true.
How loud was it on the roof?
It was great on the roof. I mean, it was like sitting right now with the amps were right there, so you could hear everything, and it was really clear. And you could tell that they were I mean, my whole thing of wanting to be up there is I just couldn't, I wanted to see how people were going to react. I
Mhm.
thought, my God, there are people who are going to see the Beatles performing or hear them maybe the first time ever. So I saw it as a big deal, and I assumed it would be all over London that they could hear it. But of course it wasn't because the amps weren't that big.
Mhm. Did you take a peek over the side to see what the crowds were
Oh,
like down below?
yes. Yes. In fact, I think in either Get Back or the first Let It Be, which Michael Lindsay Hogg did the first one, there's a scene, there is one little cell of me looking over the side. I could never do that today, by the way.
No, no.
There was no guardrail. I
Yeah.
don't, it was scary.
It's funny because I a little at a time I'm lucky enough um to have visited several Beatles sites that are very important to me. I was able to go in for a private tour of Studio 2. Still don't know exactly how I pulled that one off because I brought my wife, the kids, and my mother was with us, and we all got everyone got a look at Studio 2, and um, my goal is to someday get my way up at least to take a peek at what that roof looked like. But looking at pictures of it, and not liking heights, I was amazed that and under normal circumstances on normal days, there's no ledge. You could walk right off the edge of the roof. They had to put up a railing, which was merely you could see in the film was like a pipe. It looked like that was gonna, save you from falling over should you get too close to the edge. I mean, it looked actually fairly hairy, especially for the cameraman.
It was. I mean, it
Hmm.
was. We used to go sunbathe on the roof whenever the sun would come out, which wasn't very often, but we'd go up to that dirty old roof and put our towels down. And of course, nobody ever walked to the edge then.
Hmm.
But
Right.
it, in retrospect, and even seeing it when we did the documentary, we couldn't get on it. It was still owned by Abercrombie and Fitch.
Right.
And I think their rent was, they were running out or they were quitting their rent. And I think they were doing some work in there, so they wouldn't let us in. But I would have loved to gone back up there.
Hmm.
Tried, God
Do,
knows we tried.
do we know what's there right now? Anyone? Because
I
I know
have
Abercrombie and Fitch left, I think, but I don't know who's moved in, if anyone.
I haven't been there, so I don't know either.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Uh,
no, I
final Final question for you, Chris. What was you talk later in the film, after the Rolling Stones that you worked, you worked with Derek and Dominoes. You worked with um, being a huge Santana fan. You worked with Carlos Santana, Earth, Wind and Fire, Fleetwood Mac, Genesis, Phil Collins solo. So you're taking us now into the 80s, just about. You mentioned that Carlos Santana was one of the nicest people that you worked with in your entire career in the industry. How long were you with working with Santana?
we did a European tour and
Hmm.
Earth, Wind, and Fire opened. So it was probably a month.
Hmm.
We were on the road. I was the advanced person in that, which means I would always be at one city ahead of them.
Okay.
I Get everything set up. But
At this, good. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
oh, go ahead. My nose is itching. Sorry.
At this point, though, the responsibilities were piling up for any band that hired you. Um, what was the last tour or band act that you worked with, and then when it was over, you decided it's enough?
Echo and the Bunnymen.
Oh, okay. What was the Liverpool
It,
band? So you came full, right? I believe they're
oh,
from Liverpool, weren't they?
I moved to, I don't know actually. That's a good question.
I want to check that and make sure I'm
Yeah.
right, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
I left, I think the last tour I did in the US was maybe Dylan. I can't remember. But then I went to Germany and I had a friend who was a promoter there that I had met during the Earth, Wind, and Fire Santana tour. And I went and worked with him and started. So I would be on the tour with all the bands that came over from England or America, and I travel with them. I
Mhm.
learned German so I could be the translator. And yeah, I think it just got to the point where it was like someone, I just didn't feel like I wanted to go get people towels anymore.
Yeah,
Like, go get your own.
right.
Yeah,
That was
I
right. They're from Liverpool.
yeah,
Yeah,
good.
they were
Okay,
from.
good. No, they were very nice. It wasn't any of that. It was just that I didn't know who they were.
Mhm.
I had just, heard of them when I went on tour with them, and well, I don't know who you are. I don't want to work with you. I don't know who you are.
Hmm.
And I was done. It had been 20 years that I had spent doing that stuff, and I was pretty much done with it by then.
And then you decided to go back and go to college and get to high school and the college and the master's degree.
Yeah, I married an Englishman and we had a child, my
Hmm.
son, Phil.
Hmm.
And I wanted him to grow up in Tucson. I didn't want him to go to boarding school.
Right.
So we moved to LA for a year and then I got a house here in Tucson and came back to Tucson and raised him here. So yeah, and at that point I just had to have something else to do. So it just seemed a natural way to go.
Right. 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 All right, Ken, Alan, any final thoughts or?
I have a few questions left that I'd like to ask Chris. Uh,
Please.
I know that you say in the documentary that you became very interested in Eastern philosophy, which George was, he dove right into that. Was it mainly because of George? And did you have heavy conversations in that area?
You know, I always was a spiritual seeker.
Hmm.
And when I when the Beatles sort of went into that spiritual with the TM and all of that, that affected me. I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. But going to London and being there and being exposed to George and not only that, but other people, the Krishnas, I mean the Krishnas lived with us for I don't know how long at Friar Park. So I just kept getting exposed to this. George absolutely would sit down and talk to me forever. And he always gave anyone who was interested a copy of Paramahansa Yogananda, Autobiography of a Yogi. He had boxes of those. And then he would explain things to me and turn me on to other books to read. So I say he was my mentor in a way in terms of Eastern religion. I then went on and read a lot about it and got more involved in it, but it's still my philosophy.
Oh, very
Hmm.
good. Um, Other than George, did you maintain a friendship with the other Beatles after leaving Apple?
Well, John, I got to know best during the period he was in LA working on Harry Nilsson's record, commonly known as The Lost Weekend. Um, he and May were there, and we all stayed in this big. I stayed there too. This house in Santa Monica,
Hmm.
so I got to know John pretty well during that period of time, and I would see he and May. I would see him and May in New York if I was in that area. I'd go over to their flat or something. So that's when I really got to know him best. You got to know all of them if you were working there.
Hmm.
You just did. They were just part of that was part of the gig. The
Right.
Beatles were there. One of them was always there. Ringo and I became really good friends. And through for years we've been friends. He's my son's godfather, one of them. Paul, I saw every once in a while, but there wasn't really. He's got a place here in Tucson, actually, um, that everybody knows about. They said to me, "Don't tell anyone that we are." Linda said, "Don't tell anyone we have a house in Tucson." And I went, "Oh, yeah, I won't say a word." I get here and you turn on the radio and it's like, "There's been a Paul McCartney sighting here. There's been," and it was no secret whatsoever. And they would sometimes do disguise, but they were also, people tell me all the time they'd run into them in the market or something like that.
Didn't they
And
invite you
is
to
that
the
all
home?
four of them?
Did
That's
they invite
four.
you? I'm sorry, did they invite you to the home in Tucson?
No, I never even saw them in Tucson. That's the weirdest part. Um, don't know why, just never, by the time I got back and was doing all my thing, it just didn't really think about it too much.
Huh. What about Olivia and Danny? Are you in
Well,
contact with them?
no, not really. I mean, we have been on and off. Not Danny. Danny I haven't known since he was a little kid. I took him his first toy, a car that was battery operated with a remote. He remembered me for a while after that, but I don't know that he does today. Um, Olivia, we did, but not so much anymore. It's been kind of, off and on. This is the way it is. And
Hmm.
my friendship was always stronger with the first wives.
Right.
then it was well, actually, the best way to describe the way I see it, and by the way, I'm working on another documentary now about the women behind the men. I did 11 interviews. Patty did photos. I did interviews of 11 women, including Linda McCartney and Maureen Starkey and Shirley Watts. They weren't all Beatle women.
Uh,
Nicole Winwood, people, 11 of them, and I've carried them with me since the 80s. I think Linda's I did in 87. So finally, I've got a group that really wants to work on a documentary and a book. So that's an endeavor I'm into now, and update it with some other women.
very.
So yeah.
Were you close with Cynthia?
Cynthia, I wasn't exactly close with her because she kind of was off by that time. Yoko was already in, but certainly I did spend time with her, and she was very, very sweet. I loved her. So I look at it as the first women were actually there and involved in the Beatles when it was happening, and the
Mm.
second wives are carrying the legacy or protecting the legacy of them now.
Mhm.
Okay. And what about Yoko? Did you spend any time with her?
Oh yeah, because she was there every day. But what were we friends? No, I wouldn't. I mean, we knew each other, um and I saw them sometimes when I was in New York, but not very much. Not She's not someone I've kept in touch with.
Hmm. Okay. So finally, what was it like for you to know that George had written the song, Miss Odell, and hearing it for the first time? You actually said in the documentary it's not so much about you as it is about Bangladesh.
Well, it really was. I didn't have rice rolling up to my doorstep. Um, it was I mean, it was such a tribute. I think a friend of mine who's a musician also, Coco Carmel, she's married to Bobby Whitlock.
Mhm.
She wrote me the other day and she said, it is such a tribute when musicians write a song about you. It's their only way. It is their way of showing you how they care about you. And she says, I know I've done it myself. I've done that too. She was married to Delaney of Delaney and Bonnie first.
Oh,
So
okay.
she's been around this world a lot. And I thought that is so well said. And that's what I've always said. It's a gift. It's a gift you get that nobody can take it away. And when he wrote it, I do not think that I did not miss the reality that a Beatle writing a song with your name in it was going to probably um, put you in a different position somehow than Leon Russell writing a song about me.
Mhm.
Right. So, oh, I'm totally grateful.
A lot of Beatle fans love that song.
Yep.
It's a
So I
famous.
hear, I didn't know anybody knew it.
Oh, sure.
Well, well, George only had a few B-sides, 9 LP B-sides, and
Really? Oh.
yeah, Deep Blue is a great one. Um, I Don't Care Anymore, which was the B-side of Dark Horse.
Mhm.
Uh, you know, Zigzag. There's only a few of them that George released as 9 LP B-sides. You know,
Well, actually, Capitol Records wanted him to put on the A side because they thought it would be good for his image to have something playful and fun.
Mhm.
I will always be a B side.
but proud to be one.
I'm proud to be a B side. Yes, I am.
That's a good title for a book.
I'm proud to be a B side. I might start on that one. No, I'm not.
Alan, Darren, any last questions?
No, let Alan ask one more, two more.
Um, I was wondering if while you were at Friar Park, you got to hang out at the All Things Must Pass sessions.
Um, well, I wrote up all the lyrics. I typed up
That's
all
right.
the lyrics for him, and then I didn't go to all of them, but I would occasionally go by the studio and sit in for a while. I mean, sit in by listening.
Mhm.
Yeah, I did go sometimes, but not all the time. I was more involved at the beginning of the project.
So, given the massive production that Phil Spector did on that album. Listening to the sessions must have been very different from the album as it came out. Do you remember being surprised by the way it sounded when it actually came out, given what you heard?
You know, I always said that hearing George play it on his acoustic guitar in the kitchen was the best way to hear it.
I bet.
And
Mhm.
that is the memory I carry. But the first time I heard the acetate, he played it for Leon and me when we went to his house, and it overwhelmed me.
Mhm.
That's all I can say. I mean, but in a good way. It was like, oh my God, I thought it was wonderful. Now, of course, I realize Phil did kind of overproduce it in many ways, but the songs on it were so good.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and this film about the women, is there a timeline for that when that might turn up? And are you directing it yourself?
Well, no, Simon, who did mine, is directing it. Ken Womack is doing the book.
Mm.
And we have another lady involved who does is a little more involved in the film business. So right now we're putting together the presentation, and then we're going to be out looking for someone to give us money.
Right.
It's the best way to put it.
Okay.
Well,
Is this film, Miss Odell, the first time you worked with Simon
Yeah,
Weitzman?
yes. Yeah,
He's such a nice guy. It must have been a pleasure working with him.
he is absolutely now one of my best friends. I can honestly say that. And he's so easygoing. I mean, it was like, other than the fact that the day after I arrived in London, we already were on the set by 8 o'clock the next morning. He worked me to the bone. I have to say it. We did it in 2 weeks and there was no break whatsoever. But what he did with I mean, what we filmed and what he did with it, I think was amazing. I'm so
Hmm.
grateful
So
to
we've
him.
had Simon on here and we've had Womack on here, and now we have you. Maybe when the film comes out, we should have all the three of you come back.
Yeah.
It'd be excellent. Yeah, that'd be excellent. But you know, it took 2 years, almost 3 years for mine to come out. So, or 2 years, I can't remember. I think they said, we'll have it out in a year. And it was 2 years and it finally came out. So who knows how long it's going to take another documentary.
hmm.
Did Simon come to you, or did you look around for a filmmaker to do your story and meet Simon?
Actually, Doug Schwab, who's the distributor of it and who is the producer, approached me at a Beatle Fest in New Jersey
Hmm.
and gave me his card and said, I'd really like to talk to you about doing something. And I was like, yeah, okay, thanks. Put your card there. And then I took it with I mean, I kept the card and I thought, Maverick Productions, what am I don't know. What am I going to do? But then Simon came up to me at the end of the Beatle Fest and said, I work with Doug and we want to talk to you about a documentary. And once an Englishman comes up with an idea, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm there.
Mhm.
So Doug really put it all together.
Okay.
Okay.
I
So
Yeah.
just I left you guys speechless, right?
yes,
Yes.
already I'm looking forward to this next documentary.
Oh,
We
thank
Yeah, we should mention that the documentary of Miss Odell is available on DVD and Blu-ray. Is there any extra material in the Blu-ray, do you know?
I have no clue. I just got mine yet day before yesterday, and I haven't even opened the box. But it also will continue to stream on Peacock, Tubi, and Amazon Prime.
And Fandango. I have.
And Fandango.
I watched mine on Tubi.
Did you? You put up with the ads, huh?
Yeah, no, I didn't know they were coming. I was already in. It was like I was in too deep, and there's a commercial. I'm like, and I think the first one caught me off guard. So I needed about 15 seconds to realize, wait a minute, this is a commercial. I'm all of a sudden, Chris is selling toothpaste. Oh, it's one of these. I got commercial breaks.
I
Okay.
got the Tubi thing. Tubi's very popular with younger people, but Prime
That's
charges
me. I'm young.
Yeah,
Sorry.
there you are. Yeah, well, that's why you went there. But Prime's only charging $2.99 to rent it. I don't think that's too bad. But the Blu-ray, but for people who want to have me on their screen more than once, yes, Blu-ray and DVD are also being sold.
Okay. Well, we highly recommend you buying or streaming or renting or whatever you want to do with the documentary because it is wonderful. Chris O'Dell, thank you so much for spending time with us at Things We Said Today.
You
And
guys are wonderful. Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Chris. Thank you.
well, that was something really special right there. Our conversation with Chris O'Dell. Again, thank you, Chris, for joining us for this. And I forgot to mention, thank you, Simon Weitzman, the director of Miss O'Dell, and we're looking forward to that next documentary, The Women Behind the Scenes. What a great idea. Anyway, so we're going to tell you folks what we've been up to and how you can get in touch with us and all that neat stuff. We'll start with Darren.
Well, if you want to get in touch with me, Facebook's the best way. And a lot of people lately, I notice, who watch this show and Talk More Talk have been getting in touch. Two Facebook pages I have. Sound like Yoda there. I have two Facebook pages. Um, one of them is Darren DeVivo, obviously, and also you can go to Darren DeVivo, WFUV DJ and Beatle podcast or something like that. But all you need to do is find one, and I will make the invite you over to the other. And as for WFUV radio, you can listen to me Monday through Thursday nights, starting at 10 p.m. till 2 in the morning, and Saturday afternoons from 1 until 4. And WFUV is at 90.7 FM in the New York metropolitan area. Cover almost the entire New York metro area. If you are in the area and have reception issues or somewhere else on the globe, you could listen to WFUV.org. And the third option is get our app and listen to us there. He said, hoping it's still functioning. I think it is. I haven't checked my app in a while, but so that's basically it for me. Allan?
Okay. You can reach me on Facebook, although I say that sort of like with an asterisk because I barely turn up on Facebook anymore. But I have two pages, Allan Kozinn and Allan Kozinn Remixed. You can email me at allankozinn@gmail.com. You just have to spell it right. If you don't know how to spell it, you should buy one of these two books here and copy it off the cover. allankozinn@gmail.com. You can write to the three of us at Things We Said Today Radio Show at gmail.com and follow us on Twitter at Things We Said Fab or on BlueSky at Things We Said Today. And we have a Facebook page as well, which is Things We Said Today Video Podcast. I actually do turn up on Facebook to post the show on our Facebook page. So you can, we hope you are watching the video podcast because you can, look at the books and my guitars and Ken and all his records and see what Mets cap Darren has this week. But if you just want to listen on audio, you can go to Podbean, which has the audio version of the show, and they distribute to Apple Podcasts and iHeartRadio and all kinds of other places. So you can't miss us. Anyway, that's it for me.
All right, thank you, Alan. As for me, if you want to write to me directly, my email address is everylittlething@att.net. That's the name of my radio show that I've been doing for 43 years now. It's in syndication, and the easiest way to listen to that show is by going to WFDU's website, which is WFDU.FM. Go to their archives page, and they post the last 2 weeks worth of shows on that page and they stay there for 2 weeks each show. If you want to listen live as it's going out over the air, you can tune in to WFDU.FM on their website on Sunday mornings at 8 o'clock. All right. My YouTube channel, which is Ken Michaels Radio, last few weeks I've had a lot of interesting interviews, including Daryl Easley, who's the editor of Record Collector, and Owen Lynn, who is a journalist, freelance journalist, who has turned up on many of our podcasts. He wrote a book on George Harrison called George Harrison in the 1970s. And they both contributed articles recently to an issue from Record Collector, all devoted to John and Yoko. Actually, I should say the whole Lennon family. And because there's even chapters in there on Julian and Sean in there. This is the issue, came out last December. And in fact, Daryl said, uh, well, first of all, a couple of years ago, they put out an issue on Paul's solo career. This last one was on John and Yoko, and there'll be one on George Harrison coming out the end of this year. So December time, they'll be giving you another great issue, chock full of information about George's solo discography and all of his work. So there's an interview with the two of them. They both wrote articles on John Lennon albums, Walls and Bridges for Daryl and Menlove Avenue for Owen. You can check that out on my YouTube channel, that interview, and read the articles right in that issue. Also, I did an interview with Terry Crane, who is the author of Copywriting the Beatles. It explores everything, well, from the very beginning through, I believe it's the beginning of 1966, that required a copyright on the Beatles. But we talked specifically about novelty records that came out around that time, and we mentioned about 10 of them in detail. And also, I did an interview with Tom Frangione of SiriusXM's Beatles channel. He has, for many years, for decades, been saying that Tug of War is not only the best Paul McCartney solo album, but the best solo album of the Beatles. So we talk a lot about that and why he feels the way he does. And that's all on my YouTube channel, Ken Michaels Radio. Also, there's my website, kenmichaelsradio.com, where you can win great prizes with Beatles trivia, including the Badfinger album that came out recently, Head First, which was just remixed by Bob Jackson, who I also interviewed on my YouTube channel. The Pete Ham acoustic demos that just came out. A lot there for Badfinger fans on my website. Also, Elliot Mintz's book, We All Shine On. Allan's book with Adrian Sinclair, back there, The McCartney Legacy, Volume 1. You can win any of those prizes just by playing along with my ongoing Beatles trivia. And then finally, there's Talk More Talk, my other Beatles podcast, which is all about the solo careers of the Beatles. I do that with Kid O'Toole, Darren here. Not Darren here, it's Darren DeVivo.
Darren
And
DeVivo, yeah.
Joe Mayo. And we just did a show on all the news that's accumulated in the last month or so, all packed in one show. Okay, so be sure to check that out. So again, thanks to Chris O'Dell for joining us. And thank you, Simon. Simon for, directing this wonderful documentary. I just realized, do you know that this is 3 shows in a row where it's all been about documentaries? Once a
Yes.
Borrowed Time, Miss O'Dell.
Mhm.
Who will be next?
I
We're just gonna wait for
think
the documentary.
if I was a betting man, my thought would be it's not going to be on a film, our next show,
Mhm.
because there aren't any others.
Okay, you don't have to give that all away. You can
Oh,
leave
I'm
them.
sorry. Well, they're making one right now, so if they're done in 2 weeks, um, we'll have them on.
All right, so this has been wonderful. Thank you guys for watching this show. And thanks for all your support. Thanks to all of our subscribers and subscribers to all our various shows. And for Allan and Darren, I'm Ken Michaels, thanking you for watching and listening. And we'll see you next time.